Let me read to you a passage from the 14th chapter of St. Matthew's Gospel, verses 13 to 21. It's the Gospel for Monday of the 18th week in Ordinary Time, Year 2. St. Matthew writes, "When Jesus heard what had happened, he withdrew by boat privately to a solitary place. Hearing of this, the crowds followed him on foot from the towns. When Jesus landed and saw a large crowd, he had compassion on them and healed their sick. As evening approached, the disciples came to him and said, 'This is a remote place, and it's already getting late. Send the crowds away, so that they can go to the villages and buy themselves some food.' Jesus replied, 'They do not need to go away. You give them something to eat.' 'We have here only 5 loaves of bread and 2 fish, they answered. 'Bring them here to me,' he said. And he directed the people to sit down on the grass. Taking the 5 loaves and the 2 fish, and looking up to heaven, he gave thanks and broke the loaves. Then he gave them to the disciples, and the disciples gave them to the people. They all ate as much as they wanted, and the disciples picked up 12 basketfuls of broken pieces that were left over. The number of those who ate were about 5,000 men, besides women and children." That's from Matthew chapter 14, verses 13 to 21, for Monday of the 18th week. And what does it suggest to us? Well, you know, if we think of the sweep of human history, it's obvious that religion is essential to the human story. Historians, anthropologists, archaeologists, who themselves might be agnostic or only minimally religious, would presumably readily allow that religion has played a most important part in the shaping of civilizations, even if some reduce religion to some other function of human life. As has often been said, while man is a rational animal, he is also a religious one. All this is to say that even an empirical study of man, an empirical study in the broadest sense of the word, shows that he yearns for the divine, for the numinous, for the world beyond this one. But there has been a persistent attack on religion coming from many who are not impressed by what they see as the result of this. They see a yearning for the above, and at the same time a tragic forgetfulness and neglect of the below. They see prayers and ceremonies in the midst of material degradation. They see monasteries with squalor in the immediate surrounds. That is, they do not see anything like a sufficient concern for the welfare of man where they see the dominance of concern for God. This sort of objection has many forms and comes from many sources. It was one reason for the anti-religious and atheistic character of Marxist and Leninist and Maoist communism. Or again, a person who does not observe the Sabbath day himself and criticizes those who do, and he justifies his own non-observance by saying that those who go to church on Sundays live a life lacking concern and justice to others during the rest of the week. Well, let us set aside the obvious answer to this, that all this ignores the striking material and social benefits that so many of those motivated by religion have actually brought to the poor and the needy of society. Let us admit, let's say for argument's sake, that all too often many who are religious have not been sufficiently, let us say, humane. Well, what are we to say about this? What should be the character of religion in relation to human need? Let's ask that. Well, our gospel passage today that I read gives us a very clear answer to this in the figure of the great archetype of the religion of man. The Christian position is that when we think of religion, we ought to think in the first instance of the person of Jesus Christ. We ought not think firstly of this or that indigenous religion, or this or that great founder such as Zoroaster, Buddha, Muhammad, or whoever. We ought not think in the first instance of this or that religious period, or this or that religious institution, such as a particular grouping or series of monasteries, or religious revivals, such as the evangelical revival in 18th century England. Rather, we ought to think of the person of Jesus Christ. He is the perfect man in history. He is the exemplar of what it is to be religious. Now, what do we see in him? We see compassion for those in need, and a great impulse to meet the need. His mission was more than anything to answer the problem of sin, which is the root of all man's problems. But in our passage today that I read, we see him filled with compassion for those in need. We read, and I read the passage, "When Jesus landed and saw a large crowd, he had compassion on them and healed their sick. As evening approached, the disciples came to him and said, 'This is a remote place, and it's already getting late. Send the crowds away, so that they can go to the villages and buy themselves some food.' Jesus replied, 'They do not need to go away. You give them something to eat.' You give them something to eat." Our Lord's many miracles were precisely in answer to human need. St. James in his letter speaks of religion as pure and undefiled religion as being keeping oneself pure from sin and coming to the aid of those in need. So great has been the commitment of the Christian religion to the practice of justice and charity that in much of popular thinking, to be a Christian simply means being truly benevolent. The notion of the Christian religion in their minds has lost its central element, which is the love of God, because all they think when they see the Christian religion is love of neighbour. But at least it does show that the mind of Christ is that an absolutely central component of true religion is the service of neighbour. So much is this so, that there is a terrible divine sanction hanging on those who neglect this in life. In Matthew chapter 25, Christ describes the general judgment on all of mankind, a judgment that each one of us will see in the fullness of time. The King will say to those on his right, "Come, you who are blessed, for I was hungry and you gave me food. Whenever you did this to the least of these brothers of mine, you did it to me." And then he will say to those on his left, "Depart from me to the everlasting fire, because when I was hungry, you did not assist me." God is a God of mercy. He is rich in mercy, and he requires of us that we be merciful. If we are not, to that extent will mercy be refused us. Compassion, concern for others, is of the essence of religion. Without it, religion lacks one of its essential components.